What if the biggest crisis facing Meghan Markle isn't coming from the media, the public, or even her critics, but from a document that has been sitting in plain sight for years, waiting for everyone to notice it? Not hidden, not leaked, not discovered through some secret investigation, sitting openly on the royal website while almost nobody paid attention. And now, according to sources close to Prince William, that forgotten agreement may be turning into the very thing that could haunt the Sussex brand at the worst possible moment.
Say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear.
Background, just trying to help and basically taking control of the whole situation. So I was quite glad she was there at the time.
Slightly awkward for the other flatmates, or okay?
One needing to be heard. So if anything, hopefully the Earthshot can do that and project these voices, to a global audience.
Possible solutions to fixing and tackling some of the world's greatest environmental challenges.
I think when we first started it started as a very small idea with Harry and I scratching our heads going, how
Judge us. It is the point at which our actions, or lack of them, will have shaped forever the trajectory
of Super, whatever the lid on. We've just effectively just taken the lid off.
Yeah.
And people are just, taking the...
I had to grow up in, and I'll do everything I can to make sure we don't regress in that situation.
It sounds...
Binoculars once.
Why?
He's never
there we go, we're talking.
What was the thing on there?
Early on in the courtship, that was.
And she would definitely, she had the cream on first.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, she does.
Okay.
In terms of, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that.
I'm passionate and excited about. Let's make what we do here today together really count. Thank you. I think what I've been most trying to do since designing the prize is the scalability point.
A conversation and realise that emotions are not a bad thing. We've all got emotions and we need to speak about them.
Talk about them, yes.
And also that, I suppose...
Balance protecting the children, Catherine. My father needs a bit of protection, but it's important in my family. We're very young when this happened. Many families probably might struggle to work out, do we talk about it, do we not?
Yeah.
What's your advice? Practices in the past that, Harry and I had to grow up in? I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. And the other interesting fact as well was that only 2% of people at work go to HR.
The story begins in January 2020, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sat down with Queen Elizabeth II to finalize one of the most dramatic royal exits in modern history. The world remembers the headlines. The world remembers the speeches. The world remembers the emotional interviews. But buried beneath all the noise was a simple agreement that would shape everything that came afterward. The terms were clear. Harry and Meghan would step away from royal duties. They would pursue independent lives. They would keep the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. But there was one condition that stood above all the others. They would no longer use the Sussexes style publicly or commercially. For years, that agreement sat untouched while the Sussex brand expanded into podcasts, streaming deals, documentaries, books, interviews, and lifestyle ventures. Everything appeared to move forward. Everything appeared stable. But then, strange things started happening. Small moments, tiny details, the kind most people ignore. Yet when placed together, they began forming a pattern that critics could no longer dismiss. In April 2025, Meghan posted a letter from Ukraine's vice president on Instagram. Millions saw it. And there, sitting plainly at the top of the message, were the words that were supposed to remain in the past. Your Royal Highness. The post remained visible. No correction, no clarification, no explanation. Just 2 words sitting in front of millions of followers. At first glance, some people shrugged it off. Maybe it was an oversight, maybe it was diplomatic protocol, maybe it meant nothing. But then came another incident. A gift basket reportedly sent to podcast host Jaime King carried the same controversial styling. Again, critics noticed. Again, questions emerged. Again, the debate intensified. Coincidence? Maybe. Then Netflix happened. And suddenly, coincidence became much harder to argue. During filming, Mindy Kaling casually referred to Meghan as Meghan Markle. Instead of moving on, Meghan corrected her on camera, in a commercial production, in front of a global audience. You know I'm Sussex now. The moment lasted only seconds. But seconds can become headlines. Headlines become narratives. And narratives become ammunition. ammunition. Royal commentators immediately seized upon the clip. Critics argued that the correction wasn't simply about a surname. They argued it reflected something deeper, something tied directly to the identity that had powered the Sussex brand from the very beginning. Because that is where this story becomes truly fascinating. Strip away the interviews, strip away the documentaries, strip away the social media posts. What exactly were companies paying for? That question became impossible to ignore when one business relationship after another started collapsing. First came Spotify. The partnership that was expected to generate years of content ended after producing remarkably little. Then came the infamous criticism from Spotify executive Bill Simmons, whose comments exploded across international headlines. Suddenly, the partnership that once represented the future became a symbol of disappointment. Then came Netflix. For years, the streaming giant represented the crown jewel of the Sussex commercial empire. Reports suggested massive investments, huge expectations, endless opportunities. Yet by 2026, reports emerged that the relationship had reached its conclusion. No fireworks, no dramatic public war, just an ending. Quiet, cold final, then another shockwave hit. Reports surfaced that the publishing relationship connected to Harry's best-selling memoir had also cooled significantly. One partnership after another appeared to lose momentum. One opportunity after another seemed to shrink, and critics began asking a dangerous question. What if the appeal was never the projects themselves? What if the appeal was always the royal connection? Because every major contract seemed built around the same foundation: access, royal insight, royal relevance, royal curiosity, the fascination attached to the Sussex name. The deeper observers looked, the more another uncomfortable question emerged. What happens if that foundation starts cracking? Suddenly, discussions about titles no longer sounded symbolic. They sounded financial, strategic, existential, and while the commercial side of the story was creating headlines, another issue from Meghan's past was quietly returning to the spotlight. For years, one story had helped define her public image. It was the story of an 11-year-old girl who allegedly challenged a sexist commercial and helped inspire change. It was inspiring, empowering, memorable, the perfect origin story. Meghan told it repeatedly. Audiences loved it. Organizations celebrated it. The story became part of her identity. But over time, questions emerged. Fact-checkers reportedly struggled to verify some of the most dramatic elements. Journalists began digging deeper. Critics started pointing to inconsistencies. Then Thomas Markle publicly suggested aspects of the story may have become exaggerated over time. Suddenly, a story that once strengthened her image was creating new questions instead. And those questions were becoming increasingly uncomfortable, because when people start questioning one foundational story, they often begin questioning everything connected to it. The timing could not have been worse. Commercial partnerships were ending, critics were growing louder, royal tensions remained unresolved, and whispers about Prince William's future plans were becoming impossible to ignore. According to reports cited by multiple commentators, sources close to William have suggested that once he becomes king, title issues could be revisited in a much more serious way, not through emotional interviews, not through public arguments, through constitutional mechanisms that have existed for centuries. And that possibility changes everything, because if the institution decides to act, the consequences would extend far beyond headlines, and that is where this story takes its most dramatic turn. Because while headlines focused on social media posts, podcast controversies, Netflix contracts, and celebrity friendships, a much larger question was quietly forming in the background. What happens when an entire commercial identity becomes dependent on a title that was never permanently owned in the first place? Critics argue that this is the question nobody inside the Sussex operation wants to answer, not because the answer is unknown, but because the answer could reshape everything. Prince Harry was born into the royal family. He remains a prince regardless of future developments. His connection to the institution exists by blood, history, and constitutional reality. Meghan's royal identity, however, came through marriage. It was granted. It was not inherited. And what is granted can theoretically be altered by the same institution that granted it. That is why reports involving Prince William's future intentions continue attracting enormous attention. Sources quoted in various publications have repeatedly suggested that William has taken a far less forgiving view of the Sussex situation than his father. Whether those reports are entirely accurate or not, the perception alone has become powerful. The image being painted is one of a future monarch watching quietly, keeping score, and waiting for the moment when decisions can finally be made. What makes the situation even more explosive is that critics claim the problems extend far beyond titles. They point to the extraordinary number of staff departures that reportedly occurred across the Sussex operation. 18 departures over 6 years. That number appears again and again whenever discussions about management culture surface. And numbers create patterns. One resignation can be dismissed, 2 can be explained away, 3 can be called bad luck. But when departures continue year after year, people begin asking harder questions. Why do experienced professionals leave? Why do trusted aides disappear? Why do replacements struggle to stay? Why does the pattern keep repeating? The most talked about example remains Samantha Cohen, one of the most experienced palace aides in modern royal history. What was initially expected to be a temporary role reportedly stretched far beyond its original timeline because suitable long-term replacements proved difficult to secure. Then came stories about candidates who allegedly exited almost as quickly as they arrived. Each story fueled more speculation. Each departure became another clue in a mystery that critics insist points towards something larger. Then there are the friendships. This is where the story becomes deeply personal. Again and again, former friends have described remarkably similar experiences, relationships lasting decades suddenly ending without warning, longtime allies disappearing from the picture, people once described as inseparable finding themselves completely removed from Meghan's orbit. Critics point to a recurring pattern. Supporters call it personal growth. But regardless of which interpretation someone chooses, the stories remain remarkably consistent. Childhood friends, professional confidants, social allies, individuals who once occupied central positions seemingly vanishing from the narrative. The silence surrounding those exits often became more controversial than the exits themselves. No dramatic public fights, no obvious scandals, just absence, complete absence, and sometimes absence speaks louder than conflict. Meanwhile, another shadow continues hanging over the Sussex brand: credibility. The reason the childhood activism story keeps resurfacing is not because of what happened decades ago. It is because critics believe it symbolizes a larger issue. If one of the most celebrated stories connected to Meghan's public identity becomes disputed, people naturally begin reviewing every other chapter, every claim, every narrative, every carefully constructed image. Suddenly, scrutiny expands beyond one anecdote and starts targeting the entire foundation. And foundations matter because businesses, partnerships, and brands are built on them. Once people start questioning the foundation, confidence can disappear with shocking speed. That brings us back to the central mystery at the heart of this entire saga. Was the Sussex brand built primarily on talent, vision, and execution? Or was it built on proximity to the monarchy? Because if it was the second option, then every future development becomes far more dangerous. If major corporations invested because of royal relevance, what happens when that relevance fades? If audiences tuned in because of palace access, what happens when the palace doors close permanently? If products sold because of royal association, what happens when that association weakens? These are the questions hanging over every new venture, every new announcement, and every new rebrand attempt. And perhaps that is why this story refuses to die. Because beneath all the headlines, accusations, denials, interviews, and controversies lies one unresolved question that continues growing larger with each passing year. If the titles become vulnerable, if the partnerships continue disappearing, if the narratives continue facing scrutiny, and if the future king ultimately chooses a harder path than many expect, what remains when every borrowed advantage is stripped away? That is the question critics keep asking. That is the question supporters keep defending against. And that is the question nobody can answer with certainty today, because the final chapter of this story has not been written yet. In fact, according to those watching the royal family most closely, the chapter that could change everything may not begin until the day Prince William becomes king. And when that moment arrives, the consequences could reach far beyond headlines, far beyond Hollywood, and far beyond Montecito. The real story may only be getting started.